So there are a ton of Bible adaptations on TV these days with shows like The Chosen or The House of David or Fox's recent The Faithful, The Woman of the Bible. But when a Hollywood legend like Martin Scorsese attaches his name to such a project, it is worth taking notice. And the docuseries Martin Scorsese Presents, The Saints, is set to begin a second season with a special extended hour-long episode entitled Mary, premiering on Good Friday. I have seen it, so let's talk about it. So I'll say I did not watch the first season of this series, but from what I can tell, and based on the episode that I did watch, the series features like a mix of dramatized adaptation and documentary-style reflection. And this episode is bookended by scenes featuring Martin Scorsese as host, beginning with some like personal reflections on the importance of Easter, and then concluding with a sort of roundtable discussion with some other people about Mary and like the themes of the episode. And in between those things, we have a dramatization of like the life of Mary from her engagement to Joseph through the blessings and challenges of being the mother of Jesus to her eventual death and entrance into heaven. And you know what? I think it is fine. It is not spectacular by any means, but I do think there are some like interesting things about it. I think as like a docuseries, it obviously lacks some of like the higher end cinematic production value of just other adaptations, but it also doesn't necessarily look like cheap or anything like that. Now, Scorsese produced the episode, but I don't believe he directed it. And like the craftsmanship is not flashy, although there are actually several great like transitional shots or some impressive camera work. I think it's a relatively standard and a compelling drama, but of course its primary purpose does go deeper than just entertainment. I think The Saints works more as like a work of reflection than it does of discovery, and by that I mean I think it's more suited to like guide Christian viewers to engage the familiar story from like a fresh perspective rather than a sort of like evangelistic work to like, introduce it to those outside of the faith. Now the part I think many of you will be perhaps most interested in is how it works as like an adaptation of scripture. And during like the roundtable discussion at the end of the episode, Scorsese voices the question, how much dramatic license can one take with these stories, with these people, especially when we're dealing with someone from the Gospels? And obviously that is a big and important question. I do think for the most part, Mary arguably stays closer to like the perceived heart of the gospel story than to like a one-for-one translation from Bible to screen. That said, it doesn't veer like too far from the biblically recorded narrative, other than one kind of notable original scene, which I'll talk about more in just a moment, and also just some like minor changes to the historical events and like the timelines. For example, depictions of the stable where Jesus is born is refreshingly more like culturally and like historically accurate than most adaptations that present it as like a barn. But like most nativity stories, the wise men still like inaccurately visit a baby Jesus in the stable, and like Herod's decree of murder for the babies has been moved forward in the timeline for like dramatic tension. But I think it's important to remember that like all adaptations are also a work of interpretation. I think even just like our own personal devotional readings of scripture are itself like very highly interpretive, like where we're never approaching scripture just totally neutral. So while I do think like all interpretations should obviously be like evaluated, there's also just value in receiving and like learning from what they have to say. And like in this episode, as far as the theme, Scorsese says, in this episode, the key was to confront the reality of Mary as a human being and as a mother. And I do think this episode is at its best when viewing the story through the lens of sort of that mother-son relationship between Mary and Jesus, both in like the deep love that they share and Mary's like understandable kind of parental anxiety. Scenes such as Mary's kind of motivating role in Jesus's first miracle, or the adaptation of Matthew 12, where Jesus says that, you know, anyone who does the will of God is his mother, and then Mary's like understandably conflicted emotions from those words, I think do bring out some like interesting nuances that can easily be like overlooked when we read the stories in scripture. There's one like invented scene for the episode that features Jesus appearing to Mary after his resurrection, and it's purely speculative and not biblical, as Scorsese himself acknowledges, but it attempts to like explore the relationship between them further. And honestly, like Mary tearfully repeating the line, "My son is home, my son is home," is just a really beautiful and like relatable moment for parents. On the other hand, Jesus telling her, quote, "You made everything possible. You brought salvation into this world. It was all because of you," is strongly worded and like infuses Catholic theology into scripture in a way that may make some viewers uncomfortable. It is admittedly murky territory, and I'll be honest, I'm personally very apprehensive about any adaptation, like putting words into the mouth of Jesus and having him speak on our behalf, it's just something that makes me uncomfortable. That being said, the scene evokes very powerful emotions and is arguably one of the best moments in the episode, but just make sure to engage it as speculation rather than as gospel. So overall, I think this special episode of The Saints is interesting. I think the mixture of Bible adaptation, documentary reflection does give it a bit of a unique identity. And I just appreciate a guy like Martin Scorsese making a story like this. At times, the episode does seem to get a bit sidetracked with merely dramatizing the key gospel events rather than centering specifically on Mary's experience of those events. Even so, the episode does do well to balance its portrayal of Mary with reverence and humanity. So although not without some notable creative liberties, The Saints is a compelling reminder that although Mary had a unique life and role in the gospel, she just never stopped being a mother. But hey, I would love to hear what you think if you've been watching this series from the start or you're just joining for this special kind of extended episode. Don't be shy, jump into the comment section, let's have a conversation about it. If you haven't done so too, encourage you guys, subscribe to the channel, become a Collider. Got lots of other movie reviews, got our Faith and Pop Culture podcast, got interviews, just other fun stuff. Would love to have you guys be a part of that. But most of all, guys, thank you for watching. Stay safe and continue to collide with your world for Christ.